Hello everyone, welcome back to Steel Forest Welding and Forge. Today we're going to cover how to set up a brand new acetylene torch from start to finish. Alright guys, before we get started I want to give you some quick safety tips. Now, number one, fairly obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do not have any ignition sources or open flames near your torch setup. Acetylene is an extremely volatile gas. It will explode and explodes big time. There's a reason we use it to cut metal that burns at 22,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Gets very hot, burns very quickly. Number two, always store your acetylene tank and your oxygen tank in an upright position. Now, acetylene tanks are a bit of a unique beast. Oxygen tanks, this is just an empty cylinder basically with compressed oxygen inside. Acetylene tanks, however, this has a porous, almost sponge-like structure on the inside of the tank. Now, acetylene is dissolved in acetone, and what happens is as the acetylene separates from acetone, naturally in this upright position, the acetylene is what goes into your regulator and not your torch tip. What can happen when this is turned on its side is this can prematurely separate the acetylene from the acetone, and it creates a bubble. This bubble can then go into your regulator and pour like an acetylene and acetone liquid mixture into your line. That is what can cause flashback. So very important to keep this guy stored upright at all times. When you buy your tank from your gas supplier, more than likely you will have to transport that tank in your car laying flat. Now, traveling with it flat in the flat position for a little bit is just fine. You don't want to lay it flat for any longer than, I believe, 48 hours. Anything longer than that, and I'm not exactly sure what the implications are. We were just told not to do it in school. Once you get it back home, store it in the upright position. Make sure you have it secured to something, some kind of cart in this case, or if you have it against the wall, have it secured with chains. You can hear the birds chirping right now. I've actually got my window open because I did all this demonstrations before I made this part of the video. Now, secondly, make sure, again, they're secured to something. I prefer a torch cart. This makes it more mobile, but have these chained up tight. Don't have like a loose chain up on here where slightly bumping them can make them fall over, bang around, fall down. It's just not worth it. Spend some money, spend some time, have a nice setup, nice secure setup, however you do it. Let's see, where are we at here? Number four, have some kind of extinguisher nearby. I have a very large fire extinguisher in my garage within reach at all times. You never know what's going to happen. You never know when you're going to get a leak. You never know when something's going to catch on fire or you're going to throw a spark. So have some kind of fire extinguisher on standby. And then last but not least, whenever you're actually using your torch, eye protection and body protection. Wear non-flammable clothing. Wear clothing that is, if possible, heat resistant. This is a mostly wool shirt. Don't wear polyester. I have denim jeans on. I have closed-toed work boots, and I also have a special mask specifically designed for cutting with an acetylene torch. So have the proper PPE as well. All right, now that that's all taken care of, let's get to putting this torch set together. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get our torch set up. You'll have to forgive the angle. I'm not exactly a professional, but I think you guys will get the gist of what I'm about to do. So to put this torch set together, we're going to need a large and medium-sized crescent wrench. Just any random size wrench you have. This we'll be using later on. And that's really it. Now, one safety point I want to stress here is that when it comes to brass fittings, we do not use thread tape. Thread tape can actually lead to leaks. We use brass because they're soft, slightly malleable, and they create a good seal. And also, because we are using brass threads, we do not want to over tighten. Just a snug fit is all we need. So right here, we have our oxygen regulator, and the folks at Vulcan did a good job of color coding everything here. Pretty much anyone can put these together. Now, we want this here to be loose, This is to adjust the pressure on our regulator. The more you turn this in, the higher your pressure. When we install this, we don't want a whole lot of pressure hitting our regulator, so we're going to loosen that until that's fairly loose. Now this particular brand here, the Vulcan Performer 2.0 series, these actually have built-in flash arrestors. If you buy a different set, I cannot recommend enough you purchase a set of flash arrestors. Flash arrestors will prevent a back flame from going through your torch into your tank and the whole thing just blowing up. So we're going to take our oxygen regulator, we're going to take our hose set here, and they have this brass coupling on here. All this does is hold these tubes together. Now, further down the line, these hoses are actually connected, but up here towards the top, they're loose. So we're going to slide this down to give us some slack. Just like so. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to attach the green line, which is dedicated to oxygen, to our oxygen regulator. So right there, fittings are touching. I am not even going to turn this a quarter of a turn. That's all you need. You can set this aside. Now we're going to set up the acetylene regulator. And again, we're going to loosen that valve until it's fairly loose. You don't want it to fall apart. Now, you'll notice here that this is a different looking fitting. Now, this is a very common feature I'm about to show you on acetylene valves. If you look at this valve, you can see that there are small notches cut into this valve. This is an indicator that these threads are reversed. So in other words, instead of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, it's lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. Now they do this so that people don't get confused and mix up their oxygen and acetylene lines once they attach their torch. And as you can see here, on this line, this has the same notches cut into it. This is, again, reverse threads. So we're going to go ahead and throw this on the regulator without using tape. We're going to turn it to the left to tighten it. I'm going to tighten until it touches. Again, that's all I'm going to do. Not much. You can see if I break that loose, barely takes any effort. Just snug. With brass fittings, you do not want to over tighten. So we have both of our regulators set up. Now, I'm going to set up the torch base. This has quite a bit of memory to it, these lines. So if you look at your torch base here, you can see we have F and O. O stands for oxygen, F stands for fuel. This torch is actually compatible with also propane and LA gas or LP gas. So we're going to go ahead and hook our oxygen up to the O for oxygen. Same concept here. No thread on the tapes. That's going to be hand tight. And just the slightest tightening on the valve. Next is our acetylene line. Again, you can see we have notches cut into this valve. That indicates reverse threads. So I'm going to turn this one to the left to tighten it. And be sure you never cross thread your threads. If you do this on brass fittings, they are ruined. You'll need to replace whatever fitting you ruined. You do not want leaky lines on a torch setup for obvious reasons. Get that to hand tight. Again, just a little itty bitty tightening. That's it. All right, this is for the most part done. Now I'm going to go ahead and take the torch head here. Now this tip does not screw on for this particular torch setup. You unscrew the head of your torch. Drop your torch head into this nut, like so. And go ahead and just tighten it back onto the head. Now, again, brass threads, same concept. Do not over tighten. Just gonna give that a quick little snug. And that is done. I'm not going to go ahead and bother attaching the torch head to the base here quite yet. It's just going to get in the way for our next step. Now this here is a elbow for welding. You can see that just has a single orifice. This here is a rosebud. This has multiple orifices. This is used for heating a large area of material. All right, let's go ahead and go over to the tanks, and I'm going to show you how to set up the rest of this torch set. All right, guys, so we're looking at our torch setup here. This tank right here is our acetylene tank, and this tank right here is our oxygen tank. Typically, when you buy a torch setup, your acetylene tank is going to be a little bit smaller than your oxygen tank. Now, the size of your tank is going to depend on what you're doing. If you're going to be doing a lot of cutting, a lot of brazing, a lot of preheating, you may want to consider buying a larger tank setup. This guy right here is going to suit my needs just fine. I actually probably went up a size than I thought I had to, just in case these tanks end up being a little bit too small. I'm going to be using these mostly for local heating, for hand forging. And as luck would have it, I actually just got a client this week that requested that I braze some cast iron for him. So this torch setup is going to be perfect for that. Now, a lot of times when you get these torches from a dealer, these caps could be on kind of tight. So what you're going to want to do is just take any normal wrench. You can thread this right into this eye, like so. You can see this one's loose. They have these eyes. You can just put your wrench right into the eye of that opening, like so. Put that in. Go and give that a little crank, and that'll pop that cap right off. Let's go ahead and take off these caps. There's one. There's two. Now, one little trick to getting your tank set up is that a lot of times these tanks, unless they're really big, they're gonna not quite fit on your cart. One thing that you can do to kind of keep the bottoms from shifting around, take one of your caps, put it right in between the two tanks, right here, and that'll keep those tanks from bouncing into each other and also from moving back and forth on your torch cart. Just kind of one more way to kind of snug things down. Now I have these straps loose so I can move these tanks around, and you'll see why in a minute. And we're going to go ahead and continue this torch setup. Now, one thing that I want to stress to you guys is, for the love of God, whatever you do, do not drop your regulators. I can almost promise you that if you drop your regulators on a hard surface like a concrete floor, which I have, these things are going to be a hunk of junk, basically scrap metal. So be very careful not to drop your regulators. Also, on a safety note, always use a regulator. Never hook a line directly into your tank. Regulators will regulate the pressure coming out of your tank. For example, the pressure coming out of this tank here is probably going to be something like 1500 psi. Once it goes to the regulator, it's going to be something like 35. So do the math. You don't want that much pressure coming out. Now, when you set up your torch, typically when you push your cart towards your project, that's going to be facing your project. So you want your regulators facing out from your cart, not back the other way. You want to be able to see your dials. It seems like an obvious thing, but believe me, just having this on the wrong side makes your setup a lot more difficult than it has to be. Whenever you're hooking up a valve to a new tank, you always need what's called crack the valve. There's always a chance that some kind of insect made a nest in here, or just dirt, grime, something got in here. You do not want that going into your hoses. It'll clog them up, ruin them, and give the potential for a flashback. So what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly turn this valve on and off. Now this can be pretty loud, so always be careful and don't put your ear right next to it, please. So we're going to go ahead and crack the oxygen valve. That wasn't too bad. Now that that's been cracked, I'm going to carefully take my oxygen regulator. I'm going to thread this on by hand. Now, as you can see here, this dial is on upside down. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin this around, this tank, so this is facing the correct direction. Right there should be fine. We're going to thread that on by hand. I'm going to tip these valves up just slightly so when I look down I can see these numbers. I'm going to gently tighten this with a crescent wrench. Again, brass fittings, do not over tighten. Quick little snug. Now, one problem that you may run into when setting up your torch, the fitting on these tanks may not fit the fittings on your regulator. For example, if you look at our acetylene regulator, you can see male fitting, male valve, rut row. So we are going to need to use an adapter. Now, they make specialty adapters for acetylene tanks. Again, you can see on one side, we have these notches to indicate reverse threads. On the other side, there are no notches. That indicates normal threads. If you are not sure what kind of adapter you need, you can actually look on your tank and on your fittings. There are numbers typically on here engraved onto the brass. So for example, on this regulator here, there is a number. It says CGA 510. That is the size of this valve. And if you look on this tank here, it says CGA 300. That's the size. So this is a 300 to 500 CGA fitting. Now to put this on, I'm going to go ahead and put it on this side first. And again, reverse threads. So turn to the left to tighten. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put one crescent wrench on here. A second to tighten. Again, brass threads, do not over tighten. Just a quick little, that's all you need. I'm going to go ahead and bring this around on this side. Tighten this onto my tank. Now these are normal threads, so righty tighty, lefty loosey. Now it is important that I put this side on first. This is going to help hold a better seal if I tighten this valve onto here first. I'm actually going to run out of threads here, and that is going to pull this nozzle completely against the valve here and form a tight seal. Now you'll notice that I didn't bleed the line. I actually already cleaned this valve off earlier. I didn't feel like cracking the line and having acetylene flood into my garage. So just for the record, I did already clean this valve off. Now, again, brass threads, not over tightening, just a quick little, that's all you need. Now this valve is facing the wrong way, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that. Gently turn it. Okay. I can see I got a little bit of a problem here. Looks like these, if I keep turning this, I'm going to pinch this line here. But you also don't want this sticking out in case you bump into something. I think I'm just going to turn it as much as I can. I'm going to loosen this back up. Point that valve down, like so. Again, a little less, a little overhand tight. Turn that a little more. There. I'm happy with that. go ahead and tighten up my ratchet straps. Don't have to crank on them, just get them tight. Give that a little shake. Whole thing's pretty secure. All right, let's go on to the next step. All right, guys, welcome back. Now I'm going to give you guys some general settings for your tanks. Now, before we turn these on again, want to make sure that your valve adjustments are loose. This is what adjusts the pressure inside of your tank. Okay, both feel kind of loose. I'm going to go ahead and slowly crack this valve. There. Now you can see this valve here shot up. Now what this valve roughly indicates to you is the amount of pressure inside your tank. Think of it as a fuel gauge. I can see that our other needle here did not move. This indicates the amount of pressure in your line. This is open and loose, so we have no pressure. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly turn this. You'll see that dialing up. Good kind of neutral setting that I have found that works really well is about 35 psi. Now, for your oxygen tank, you can go ahead and open that up pretty far. Okay? Now, for your acetylene tank, however, you only want to crack this valve. This is in case of an emergency, like perhaps you have a flashback in your line. If you just crack your valve, it's a lot easier just to turn that valve again off real quick at the source and starve that line of any fuel. If you sit here and open this valve up all the way, that takes more time. So again, loose valve, I'm going to crack that open. There we go. Our dial moved. Now, a good setting for our acetylene is about 7 psi. We're going to go ahead and turn that until that needle starts to move. There it goes. There's 6, 7. Now, these numbers are probably going to move while the first time I turn the torch on. What we'll have to do is we'll have to come back and adjust these once we've turned the torch on. All right, we're going to do the last part of our torch setup here. Now, I've had these valves open for a while. One thing I'm going to do that's very important for you to do as well is just to, I guess you call a sniff test. Acetylene has a very offensive odor to it. When you smell leaking acetylene, you are going to know it's leaking. It's kind of like propane. There's a smell associated with it, so you know there's a leak. The first time you do a torch setup, make sure you just check for leaks. Best, probably the easiest way to do that is just give it a sniff test. Just kind of stick your nose up. I can't smell any acetylene, so it seems like this has a pretty good setup. If you do smell acetylene, shut everything off, bleed your line, which I'll show you to do later, and then go through and just retighten all your valves. Give them just a little bit more of a crank. You know, a little bit of a harder crank here, 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 just a little bit. You might just have a very slight leak. But again, if you have leaky acetylene, you're going to know it. So I've got my torch head here. Torch body. Let's go ahead and feed that through here. So the way I like to set a torch up, so we have our valves here, a torch head here. I like to have my valves facing me, not the other way around. I don't like to put the head on like so. I like it with the valves facing up. So we're just going to go ahead, thread this on. Now, typically, with one of these fittings here, you do not need to reef on this at all. Just usually hand tight will do it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just tighten that by hand. Good. Now, we have our main acetylene and oxygen line off. Now, and this is another adjusting valve, which I'll go over later. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my oxygen line. Pull that little trigger there. That's going to allow some oxygen to come out. I'm going to look at my valve. I can see that I am, in fact, running at about 35 psi. I'm going to turn that just a hair. When I pull that trigger, it is now coming out at about 37. 35, 37 is a good general setting. Now, in order to have that oxygen come out, I had to pull that trigger. All right. I'm going to turn that oxygen off. Acetylene, however, does not go through this valve. It goes through a different valve. So when I turn this on, acetylene comes out right away. So I'm going to crack that, check my settings. You don't want to fill your garage up with acetylene for obvious reasons. Okay, so it looks like I have my settings correct. So now we're going to go ahead and fire this torch up, make sure everything works, and we're going to have fire safety on standby just in case. Here we are for the last part of our torch setup. Now I'm going to move away from my torch set here, obviously so I don't blow myself up. I've got the line stretched out without any kinks or knots in it. I've also got gloves and safety glasses and a fire extinguisher on standby. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up the oxygen valve, okay? Now again, this is regulated through this dial here, which I'll show you in a moment, and through the cutting trigger. So we have this valve completely off. This is what adjusts our oxygen and fuel mixture. Now our acetylene, what we're going to do is we're just going to crack this slightly so we have a gentle flame coming out of here. We don't want a giant fireball, so you do not want to crank this valve up. Just crack it slightly. Now we're going to use a flint striker. You always want to use a flint striker and not an open flame for starting a torch. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to crack this valve. I'm going to light the torch once this little area in here fills with acetylene. Then I'm going to dial the torch in using this oxygen adjustment. So here we go. Crack. Okay, like this, and have what's correct. Oops. If your flame dies, close off your acetylene, close off your oxygen, try again. New torch, so I haven't done this before on this torch setup. Might take a little to get used to. Crack your acetylene. A little more. Oxygen. Right about there is what you want. So those little cones, we're good to go. Giving a little bit more acetylene. There we go. That is a decent cutting torch right there. Want those little blue cones on there to be about 3/16 of an inch long. That's good cutting temperature. Now, shut this off. We're just going to turn off our acetylene. Close the oxygen valve. And then our torch is turned off. We're going to close our tanks. Like so. Close our acetylene tank. Now we're going to bleed the lines. So we're going to turn this valve. Let's run it until the oxygen stops. Same with our acetylene. Gone. Just give this gas a moment to disperse and then we're all done. Wrapped up this hose and our torch setup is complete. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. Please check out our Etsy store and look forward to some more how-to videos, tool reviews, and maybe even some demos. Thanks again, guys.